The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, carefully opened a beautifully wrapped package that had arrived with the Morning Post. Her fingers trembled slightly as she peeled back the elegant paper, revealing a small velvet box inside. This simple act had become a familiar ritual over the years since she married Prince William, but each gift still held the power to move her in ways she never expected. Catherine's journey into the world of royal gift-giving began long before she became a princess. Even as William's girlfriend, she had witnessed the incredible generosity that flowed toward the royal family from every corner of the globe. But nothing could have prepared her for the emotional weight these gifts would carry once she officially became part of the family. The first gift that truly touched her heart came just days after their fairy tale wedding in 2011. It was a simple wooden box, handcrafted by an elderly carpenter from Wales who had spent months perfecting every detail. Inside the box was a collection of pressed flowers from the gardens of Buckingham Palace, each one carefully preserved and labeled with the date it was picked. The carpenter had included a note explaining that his late wife had been a devoted royal watcher, and she had always dreamed of creating something beautiful for any future princess. Catherine sat in her private sitting room, holding the delicate flowers up to the light. Each petal seemed to tell a story of love, dedication, and hope. The purple violets reminded her of her wedding bouquet, while the white roses spoke of new beginnings. She found herself crying softly, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she was now part of something much larger than herself. The emotional impact of that first gift set the tone for everything that would follow. Catherine began to understand that these weren't just presents, they were pieces of people's hearts, offered freely to someone they saw as a symbol of hope and continuity. Each gift carried with it the dreams, prayers, and well-wishes of individuals who might never meet her in person but felt connected to her story nonetheless. Over the following months, gifts continued to arrive from around the world. There was the hand-knitted baby blanket from a grandmother in Scotland, created with the hope that Catherine and William would one day have children of their own. The woman had included a letter explaining that she had started knitting the blanket the day the engagement was announced, working on it every evening while watching the news coverage of their relationship. Catherine found herself keeping these letters, filing them carefully in a special drawer in her desk. She would often read them when she felt overwhelmed by her new responsibilities, finding strength in the words of strangers who had become, in a way, extended family members she had never met. One particularly moving gift came from a young girl in Australia who had been battling cancer. The child had spent her time in the hospital creating a scrapbook filled with pictures, drawings, and stories about what it meant to be a princess. The final page contained a simple message written in shaky handwriting: "Thank you for showing me that princesses can be real and kind." When Catherine read those words, she had to excuse herself from the room. She found William in his study and showed him the scrapbook, her voice breaking as she read the final message aloud. They sat together in silence for several minutes, both understanding the profound responsibility that came with their positions. This wasn't about crowns and carriages, it was about being a source of hope for people who desperately needed something beautiful to believe in. The gifts weren't always elaborate or expensive. Some of the most meaningful ones were the simplest. There was the drawing from a 5-year-old boy in Canada who had colored a picture of Catherine and William holding hands, with the word love written in bright red crayon across the top. The child's mother had included a note explaining that her son had been asking when he could send a present to the princess, and this was his contribution. Catherine had that drawing framed and hung it in the nursery they were planning, even though they didn't have children yet. She wanted it to be one of the first things her future babies would see, a reminder of the pure, innocent love that existed in the world. As the months turned into years, Catherine began to notice patterns in the gifts she received. Many came from people who were facing difficult times in their lives: illness, loss, financial hardship, or family problems. Yet instead of asking for help, these individuals had chosen to give something of themselves to her. The generosity of the human spirit, even in the face of adversity, never ceased to amaze her. One gift that particularly stood out came from a women's shelter in London. The residents had worked together to create a quilt, with each woman contributing a square that represented something meaningful in her life. Some squares depicted children's faces, others showed flowers or inspirational quotes. The accompanying letter explained that working on the quilt had given the women a sense of purpose and community during a very difficult time in their lives. Catherine visited the shelter personally to thank the women, bringing with her some of her own handmade items to share. She spent the afternoon listening to their stories, learning about their struggles and their hopes for the future. The quilt now hangs in her private sitting room, a daily reminder of the strength and resilience of the human spirit. The emotional impact of these gifts extended beyond Catherine herself. William often found her in tears over a particularly touching letter or gift, and he began to understand how deeply these gestures affected his wife. He watched as she transformed from someone who received gifts with polite gratitude to someone who truly absorbed the love and hope embedded in each offering. One evening, after Catherine had spent hours responding to thank you letters, William asked her why she insisted on personally acknowledging every gift, no matter how small. Her response revealed the depth of her understanding about her role. These people have given me pieces of their hearts. The least I can do is let them know that their gift has found its way into mine. This philosophy began to shape how Catherine approached all aspects of her royal duties. She started to see her public appearances not as obligations, but as opportunities to connect with the people who had shown her such kindness through their gifts. Every handshake, every smile, every moment of genuine engagement was her way of giving back to those who had given so much to her. The gifts also began to influence her charitable work. When she received multiple items related to children's welfare, she knew she needed to focus more attention on that area. The messages of hope from cancer patients led her to become more involved with organizations supporting those battling serious illnesses. Each gift was like a compass pointing her toward where she was needed most. One particularly memorable gift came from a group of military wives whose husbands were deployed overseas. They had created a photo album filled with pictures of their families, along with personal stories about the challenges of military life. The women had written that they drew strength from Catherine's grace under pressure and wanted to share their own stories of resilience with her. Catherine was so moved by their gift that she arranged to meet with the women personally. She listened to their concerns about deployment schedules, family separations, and the unique challenges faced by military families. This meeting led to her increased involvement with military charities and her ongoing support for service families. As Catherine's first year as a princess drew to a close, she reflected on the incredible journey she had been on. The gifts she had received had taught her more about human nature, generosity, and love than she could have learned from any textbook or training program. Each item in her collection represented a connection to someone whose life had been touched by hope, often in the midst of difficult circumstances. The wooden box from the Welsh carpenter still sat on her dressing table, its contents now joined by dozens of other meaningful mementos. The pressed flowers had faded slightly, but their significance had only grown stronger with time. They reminded her daily that her role as princess was not about personal glory, but about serving as a symbol of hope and continuity for people around the world. Looking back on those early days, Catherine realized that the gifts had prepared her for the responsibilities that lay ahead. They had taught her that being a princess meant carrying the dreams and hopes of others, treating each interaction as sacred, and never forgetting that behind every gift was a human being who had chosen to share their love with her. The impact of these early gifts would continue to shape Catherine's approach to her royal duties for years to come. They had shown her that royalty was not about being elevated above others, but about being connected to them in the most profound way possible. Every gift was a reminder that she was part of a larger human family, one that extended far beyond the walls of any palace and reached into the hearts of people she might never meet but who had already touched her soul. As she prepared for bed that first anniversary of her wedding, Catherine carefully placed the day's new gifts alongside the others in her special collection. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to serve, new connections to make, and, undoubtedly, new gifts that would continue to shape her understanding of what it truly meant to be a princess of the people. The soft cry of baby George echoed through the nursery at Kensington Palace as Catherine gently rocked her firstborn son. It was 2013, and motherhood had brought an entirely new dimension to the gifts that arrived daily at the palace. Where once the presents had been meant for her alone, now they came flooding in for the newest member of the royal family, each one carrying the hopes and dreams of people who saw in this tiny prince the future of the monarchy. Catherine had always been moved by the generosity of strangers, but nothing had prepared her for the emotional tidal wave that accompanied the gifts for George. The first package to truly overwhelm her came from a children's hospital in Manchester, where young patients had spent weeks creating a mobile for the prince's nursery. Each hanging piece had been carefully crafted by small hands, some attached to 4 drips, others weakened by treatments, but all determined to create something beautiful for the baby they would never meet. As Catherine hung the mobile above George's crib, tears streamed down her face. The colorful elephants, lions, and butterflies seemed to dance in the afternoon light, each one representing a child's hope for the future despite their own uncertain circumstances. She found herself making a silent promise to George that he would grow up understanding the incredible love and sacrifice that had gone into creating even this simple gift. The letters accompanying the children's gifts were perhaps even more moving than the presents themselves. Parents wrote about their own children's excitement at hearing about the royal baby, how the news had brought joy to hospital wards and brightened difficult days. One mother shared that her terminally ill daughter had spent her final weeks knitting a tiny hat for Prince George, saying it gave her purpose when everything else felt meaningless. William found Catherine one evening sitting on the nursery floor, surrounded by hundreds of knitted items, tiny shoes, and handmade toys. She was methodically reading each accompanying note, her face a mixture of joy and heartbreak. When he asked what she was doing, she looked up with eyes full of tears and said, "I'm trying to remember every single person who took the time to love our son before they even knew him." The gifts for George revealed something profound about human nature that Catherine had never fully appreciated before becoming a mother herself. People who had never met her, who lived thousands of miles away, who faced their own daily struggles, had chosen to spend time, money, and energy creating something for her child. The selflessness of it was overwhelming. One gift that particularly touched Catherine's heart came from an elderly woman in rural Ireland who had crocheted an entire wardrobe for George's first year. The package included tiny sweaters, booties, blankets, and even a little cap with prints embroidered in gold thread. The accompanying letter, written in shaky handwriting, explained that the woman had been crocheting for 70 years and had never made anything finer than these items for the royal baby. Catherine was so moved by this gift that she arranged for the woman to be invited to a garden party at Buckingham Palace. When they met, the elderly crocheter's hands shook with emotion as Catherine thanked her personally and showed her photographs of George wearing the tiny sweater. The woman's tears of joy reminded Catherine that these gifts were never really about the recipients, they were about the givers having an opportunity to express their love and connection to something larger than themselves. The international scope of the gifts never ceased to amaze Catherine. Packages arrived from every continent, each reflecting the unique culture and traditions of its origin. From Japan came an exquisite silk kimono designed for a toddler, accompanied by a letter explaining that the fabric had been blessed at a temple for good fortune. From Kenya came a hand-carved wooden lion, created by an artist who wanted the prince to know about his grandfather's connection to Africa. One of the most unusual gifts came from a group of astronomers in Chile who had officially named a star after Prince George. The certificate and photographs of the constellation were presented in a beautiful wooden box along with a telescope designed for children. The accompanying letter explained that they wanted George to always remember to reach for the stars and to understand that the universe was full of wonders waiting to be discovered. Catherine began to realize that these gifts were not just expressions of love for her family, but reflections of people's hopes for the future of the world. In George, they saw possibility, continuity, and hope. The gifts were their way of investing in that future, of contributing something positive to the life of someone who would one day hold an important position in society. As George grew from infant to toddler, the gifts evolved with him. Where once they had been practical items like blankets and clothing, they now included toys, books, and educational materials. Catherine was particularly moved by a collection of children's books that arrived from a group of librarians in Canada. Each book had been carefully selected to teach important values like kindness, courage, and compassion. The librarians had included notes about why they chose each title and how they hoped these stories would shape the young prince's character. The arrival of Princess Charlotte in 2015 brought another wave of gifts, this time with a distinctly feminine touch. Catherine found herself once again overwhelmed by the generosity of strangers, but now she was also watching George's reaction to the presents that arrived for his new sister. The 2-year-old prince seemed to understand that people around the world loved his family, and Catherine began to see how these gifts were teaching her children about gratitude and service from the earliest age. One gift for Charlotte that particularly moved Catherine came from a women's cooperative in Bangladesh. The women had spent months creating an intricate embroidered dress for the princess, working by lamplight after their regular jobs to complete the delicate needlework. The letter accompanying the dress explained that the women saw Charlotte as a symbol of possibility for girls everywhere, and they wanted to contribute something beautiful to her life. Catherine wore the dress herself to a charity event supporting women's education, making sure to mention the cooperative and their incredible craftsmanship. The photographs of her wearing their creation were sent back to the women, who displayed them proudly in their workshop. It was a perfect example of how these gifts created connections that transcended geographical and cultural boundaries. The birth of Prince Louis in 2018 completed Catherine's family and brought with it another outpouring of love from around the world. By now, Catherine had developed systems for managing and acknowledging the thousands of gifts that arrived, but each one still touched her heart. She had learned to see beyond the physical items to the emotions and intentions behind them. One gift for Louis that stood out came from a group of premature baby nurses who had created a photo album showing the development of premature infants alongside inspirational quotes about strength and resilience. Louis had been born healthy and full-term, but the nurses wanted his family to understand the fragility and preciousness of life. Their gift served as a reminder that not all families were as fortunate, and it reinforced Catherine's commitment to supporting healthcare workers and vulnerable children. The cumulative effect of receiving thousands of gifts over the years had transformed Catherine's understanding of her role in ways she never anticipated. She began to see herself not as someone who deserved these gifts, but as a steward of the love and hope they represented. Every public appearance became an opportunity to honor the generosity of the gift givers, every charitable endeavor a chance to pay forward the kindness she had received. Catherine started incorporating elements from the gifts into her public work. When she visited children's hospitals, she would often bring along some of the handmade toys she had received, sharing them with young patients and telling them about the children who had made them. When she spoke at educational events, she would reference the books and learning materials that had been sent for her own children, emphasizing the importance of education and creativity. One particularly meaningful tradition that developed was Catherine's practice of featuring gift makers in her official portraits and photographs. When the annual family Christmas card was released, careful observers could often spot items in the background that had been sent by well-wishers. A handmade quilt might serve as a backdrop, or the children might be photographed wearing items that had been lovingly crafted by supporters. The emotional impact of the gifts extended to William as well. He watched his wife's transformation from someone who was occasionally moved by kind gestures to someone who was deeply affected by every expression of love their family received. He saw how the gifts shaped her approach to motherhood, making her more aware of the struggles faced by other families and more committed to using her position to help others. One evening, as they sat together reading thank you letters from gift recipients, William remarked on how the presents had changed their lives in unexpected ways. Catherine nodded, explaining that each gift had taught her something new about resilience, creativity, or love. The cumulative effect was an education in human nature that no royal protocol training could have provided. The gifts also served as a bridge between Catherine's public and private lives. While her official duties required her to maintain a certain distance and formality, the personal nature of the gifts allowed her to connect emotionally with the people she served. Reading a letter from a grandmother who had knitted booties while thinking about her own grandchildren helped Catherine understand the universal experiences that connected all mothers, regardless of their circumstances. As her children grew older, Catherine began sharing some of the gift stories with them, teaching them about the kindness of strangers and the importance of gratitude. George, Charlotte, and Louis learned that the toys they played with and the clothes they wore had been created with love by people they might never meet. This knowledge was shaping them into compassionate individuals who understood their privileged position came with responsibilities to others. The transformation that occurred in Catherine through receiving these gifts was perhaps the most valuable present of all. She had evolved from someone who was grateful for kind gestures to someone who truly understood the profound connections that could exist between strangers. Each gift had added another layer to her understanding of human nature, service, and love, creating a foundation that would support her royal duties for decades to come. The autumn of 2020 brought challenges that Catherine never could have imagined when she first became a princess. The world was in the grip of a global pandemic, and the usual flow of gifts to the royal family had transformed from personal tokens of affection into something far more profound, lifelines of hope during humanity's darkest hour. As she sat in her home office at Anmer Hall, surrounded by packages that had arrived despite lockdown restrictions, Catherine felt the weight of each gift differently than ever before. The first gift to truly capture the spirit of this new era came from a group of healthcare workers at a London hospital. They had spent their precious break time creating a scrapbook filled with photos, drawings, and messages from their children at home. The title page read simply, "Thank you for caring about us while we care for everyone else." Inside, Catherine found pictures of exhausted doctors sleeping on hospital floors, nurses celebrating small victories with patients, and children's drawings of their parent heroes in scrubs and masks. As Catherine turned each page of the scrapbook, she felt her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. These were people who were risking their lives every day to save others, yet they had taken the time to create something beautiful for her family. The final page contained a group photo of the entire hospital staff holding a banner that read, "From our royal family to yours, with love and gratitude." The pandemic had changed everything about how gifts were given and received. Where once packages might arrive through normal postal channels with little fanfare, now each delivery represented someone's determination to maintain human connection despite social distancing. The effort required to send a gift during lockdown made each one infinitely more precious. One particularly moving package arrived from a care home where residents had been isolated from their families for months. The elderly residents had worked together to create a memory quilt, with each square representing a precious moment from their lives. Some squares showed wedding photos, others depicted grandchildren, and many featured images of the royal family during happier times. The accompanying letter explained that working on the quilt had given the residents a sense of purpose and connection during the loneliest period of their lives. Catherine arranged for a video call with the care home residents, thanking them personally for their gift and listening to their stories. Many of the elderly people hadn't seen their own families in months, and the opportunity to connect with the Princess of Wales brought tears of joy to their eyes. The call lasted much longer than scheduled, as Catherine found herself deeply moved by their resilience and wisdom in the face of such difficult circumstances. The gifts from children during this period were particularly poignant. With schools closed and normal childhood activities suspended, many young people channeled their energy into creating presents for the royal family. Catherine received hundreds of drawings depicting her and William as superheroes, fighting an invisible enemy to keep everyone safe. The children's innocent faith that their princess could somehow make everything better was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. One gift that stayed with Catherine for months came from an 8-year-old girl whose grandmother had died from COVID-19. The child had created a photo album dedicated to her grandmother's memory, featuring pictures of their time together and stories about the woman's love for the royal family. The final page contained a letter to Catherine asking her to please tell Grandma I miss her when you see her in heaven, because I know princesses can talk to angels. Catherine spent that evening in tears, holding the album and thinking about all the families who had lost loved ones during the pandemic. She wrote a personal response to the little girl, sharing her own memories of loss and the comfort that could be found in keeping precious memories alive. The exchange led to an ongoing correspondence that provided comfort to both the child and Catherine during difficult times. The international nature of the gifts during the pandemic revealed how connected the world had become through shared suffering. Packages arrived from countries in various stages of lockdown, each one representing someone's determination to reach out across borders and barriers to share love and hope. From Italy came handmade masks decorated with royal symbols, created by fashion students who wanted to contribute something both beautiful and practical during the health crisis. One of the most elaborate gifts arrived from Japan, where a master origami artist had created thousands of paper cranes in varying shades of blue and gold. According to the accompanying letter, each crane represented a prayer for the royal family's health and happiness during the pandemic. The artist had included instructions for displaying the cranes and explained the Japanese tradition that 1,000 paper cranes could make wishes come true. Catherine arranged the cranes throughout Anmer Hall, their delicate forms catching the light in every room. Visitors to the house were always struck by their beauty, and Catherine would share the story of their creation, emphasizing how art and beauty could transcend cultural boundaries to provide comfort during difficult times. The gifts also reflected changing priorities during the pandemic. Instead of luxury items or decorative objects, many people sent practical gifts that showed their understanding of the challenges everyone was facing. There were homemade bread recipes from families who had learned to bake during lockdown, seeds and gardening supplies from people who had discovered the therapeutic value of growing their own food, and books chosen specifically to provide comfort and escapism during difficult times. One particularly thoughtful gift came from a librarian in Scotland who had curated a collection of books about resilience, hope, and overcoming adversity. Each book included a handwritten note explaining why it had been chosen and how it might provide comfort during uncertain times. The librarian had included books for both adults and children, recognizing that the entire family was navigating this crisis together. Catherine found herself turning to these books repeatedly during the most challenging days of the pandemic. The stories of people who had overcome seemingly impossible obstacles provided strength when the daily news felt overwhelming. She began incorporating quotes and lessons from these books into her public speeches and virtual appearances, sharing the wisdom she had gained from this unexpected literary collection. The digital age had also transformed how gifts were shared and acknowledged. Catherine began posting more personal messages on social media, showing herself using or displaying gifts that had been sent to the family. A video of her children playing with toys created by young makers went viral, spreading joy far beyond the original gift givers and inspiring others to engage in acts of creativity and kindness. One virtual gift that particularly touched Catherine came from a school in Australia where students had created an online art gallery dedicated to the royal family. Each piece included audio recordings of the young artists explaining their work and sharing messages of support. Catherine spent an entire afternoon exploring the virtual gallery, listening to the voices of children she might never meet but who had created something beautiful in her honor. The experience of receiving gifts during the pandemic had taught Catherine new lessons about human resilience and creativity. She watched as people found ways to express love and maintain connections despite unprecedented restrictions. The gifts became symbols of humanity's refusal to be defeated by circumstances beyond their control. One gift that exemplified this spirit came from a group of musicians who had been unable to perform during lockdown. They had recorded individual parts of a musical piece from their separate homes, then combined them into a virtual performance dedicated to the royal family. The video showed each musician in their own space, playing their part while thinking of others, creating something beautiful together despite being apart. Catherine shared this video during one of her virtual appearances, using it as an example of how creativity could bridge distances and bring people together even during isolation. The musicians were overwhelmed by the recognition, and several of them went on to create similar collaborative pieces that brought comfort to their communities. The cumulative effect of receiving thousands of gifts during the pandemic was transformative for Catherine. She had always understood the generosity of the human spirit, but the circumstances of 2020 and beyond had shown her how powerful that generosity could be in the face of genuine adversity. People who had lost jobs, homes, and loved ones still found ways to create and share beautiful things with others. As the worst of the pandemic began to ease and normal life slowly resumed, Catherine found herself profoundly changed by the experience. The gifts she had received during that period had taught her about the indomitable nature of human hope and the importance of maintaining connections even in the most challenging circumstances. She began incorporating these lessons into her royal duties as restrictions lifted. Her public appearances took on a new depth and authenticity, informed by the real connection she had made with gift givers during the pandemic. She spoke with greater authority about resilience, community support, and the power of small acts of kindness because she had witnessed these qualities firsthand through the gifts she received. The thank you letters Catherine wrote during this period were different too. They reflected a deeper understanding of what the gifts meant to their creators and a more profound appreciation for the effort required to maintain hope during difficult times. Many of the gift givers commented that her responses felt more personal and heartfelt than ever before. Looking back on this period, Catherine realized that the pandemic gifts had marked a turning point in her relationship with the public. The shared experience of uncertainty and loss had created a deeper bond between the royal family and the people they served. The gifts were no longer just expressions of admiration or loyalty, they were communications between fellow travelers on a difficult journey, sharing strength and hope with each other. The transformation continued as Catherine began her recovery from her own health challenges. The gifts that arrived during her treatment carried a different energy entirely, one of protective love and fierce hope that went beyond anything she had experienced before. These offerings would teach her yet again about the profound connections that could exist between strangers and the healing power of collective love and support. The spring of 2024 brought an unexpected challenge that would test every lesson Catherine had learned about grace, strength, and human connection over her 13 years as a princess. When the news of her cancer diagnosis became public, the flood of gifts that arrived at Kensington Palace carried an entirely different energy than anything she had experienced before. These were not congratulatory presents or tokens of admiration, but offerings of pure love, hope, and protective intention from people around the world who felt compelled to wrap her in their collective care. Catherine sat quietly in her private sitting room, still processing the overwhelming response to her video message about beginning preventative chemotherapy. The table before her was covered with packages that had arrived in just the first few days after her announcement. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for the first one, a simple brown paper package with no return address, just a single word written in careful script across the front: courage. Inside, she found a small wooden cross, obviously handmade, with a note that read, "This belonged to my mother, who beat cancer 3 times. She always said it gave her strength. I want you to have it now." There was no signature, no way to thank the sender, just an anonymous act of love from someone who understood what she was facing. The gifts that arrived during her treatment were unlike anything Catherine had received before. They carried an urgency and intensity that reflected people's deep concern for her well-being. Many came from cancer survivors who wanted to share talismans, books, or items that had brought them comfort during their own journeys. Others came from families who had lost loved ones to the disease and wanted to offer whatever protection they could to prevent another family from experiencing that pain. One package that particularly moved Catherine came from a children's cancer ward in Manchester. The young patients had created a bravery blanket, with each child contributing a square decorated with symbols of strength and hope. Lions, sunflowers, rainbows, and hearts covered the colorful quilt, along with messages like "You've got this, princess," and "We're fighting together." The accompanying letter from the head nurse explained that working on the blanket had given the children a sense of purpose and hope during their own difficult treatments. Catherine wrapped herself in the blanket during her chemotherapy sessions, feeling the love and courage of those brave children surrounding her. She arranged for photographs to be sent back to the ward showing her using their gift, and the children were thrilled to know their creation was providing comfort to their princess during her own battle. The international response was overwhelming. Packages arrived from every corner of the globe, each one representing someone's desire to contribute to her healing. From Brazil came healing crystals blessed by indigenous shamans. From India arrived Ayurvedic herbs and meditation guides. From Ireland came holy water and rosary beads that had been blessed at sacred sites across the country. While Catherine didn't necessarily believe in all the spiritual traditions represented by these gifts, she was deeply moved by the intention behind each one. One gift that touched her heart came from a monastery in Tibet, where monks had spent weeks creating a mandala dedicated to her healing. The intricate sand painting had been photographed before being ceremonially dissolved, and the sand had been collected and sent to her in a small silk pouch. The accompanying letter explained that the temporary nature of the mandala represented the impermanence of all suffering and that the dissolved sand carried prayers for her swift recovery. Catherine kept the pouch of blessed sand on her bedside table, touching it gently each morning as a reminder that thousands of people around the world were holding her in their thoughts and prayers. The idea that monks she would never meet had spent countless hours creating something beautiful specifically for her healing was both humbling and empowering. The gifts from children were particularly poignant during this period. Young people who had heard about her illness sent drawings depicting her as a superhero fighting cancer, stories they had written about brave princesses overcoming impossible challenges, and handmade cards with messages like "Get well soon so you can keep helping people." The innocent faith these children had in her ability to overcome her illness provided strength on the most difficult days. One particularly memorable gift came from a class of 7-year-olds in Canada who had spent their art period creating individual portraits of Catherine. Each child had drawn her differently, some showing her wearing a crown, others depicting her in casual clothes, but all including the same element, a bright, determined smile. Their teacher had compiled the drawings into a book titled "Our Princess is Strong" and included a letter explaining that the children wanted Catherine to remember how many people believed in her strength. Catherine found herself crying happy tears as she looked through each unique portrait. The children's perceptions of her as strong, brave, and capable helped her see herself in a new light during moments when she felt anything but powerful. She had copies of the book made for the children's families and sent a video message to the class, thanking them for reminding her that she was stronger than she knew. The gifts also came from unexpected sources. Professional athletes sent signed memorabilia with messages about fighting and winning. Celebrity chefs shared family recipes that had sustained their own families during difficult times. Scientists and researchers sent information about cutting-edge treatments and promising developments in cancer care. Each gift represented a different perspective on strength, healing, and hope. One particularly meaningful gift came from a group of military wives whose husbands were deployed overseas. They had created a care package similar to those they prepared for their spouses, filled with comfort items, inspirational quotes, and handmade treats. Their letter explained that they recognized the kind of courage required for the battle Catherine was facing and wanted her to know she had the support of people who understood what it meant to fight for something important. The digital gifts were equally powerful during this period. Catherine received thousands of emails, social media messages, and virtual cards from people sharing their own cancer stories and offering encouragement. Many people sent photos of themselves ringing the bell that signifies the end of cancer treatment, with messages promising that Catherine would have her own bell-ringing moment soon. One email that particularly resonated came from a teenage girl who had survived leukemia and gone on to become a young advocate for cancer research. She shared her story of diagnosis, treatment, and recovery, emphasizing how the experience had ultimately made her stronger and more compassionate. She included photos of herself at various stages of her journey, from the scared child in a hospital bed to the confident young woman speaking at fundraising events. The collective effect of receiving thousands of these gifts was transformative for Catherine. She began to understand that her cancer journey was not just a personal battle but a shared experience that connected her to millions of people around the world who had faced or were facing similar challenges. The gifts created a web of support that extended far beyond her immediate family and medical team. One gift that symbolized this connection came from a global network of cancer support groups who had coordinated to send a single, massive card. The card itself was the size of a poster, covered with signatures, messages, and small drawings from cancer patients, survivors, and families from dozens of countries. The front simply read, "You are not alone in this fight." Catherine had the card framed and hung it in her bedroom where she could see it every day. During the most difficult moments of her treatment, she would read the individual messages and draw strength from knowing that so many people were walking similar paths and offering their support to someone they had never met. As her treatment progressed and her health began to improve, Catherine started thinking about how to honor the incredible generosity she had received. The gifts had not only provided comfort during her illness but had also taught her new lessons about resilience, community support, and the healing power of human connection. She began planning ways to give back to the communities that had supported her. Cancer research charities started receiving larger donations from the Royal Foundation. Catherine arranged personal visits to hospitals and treatment centers, bringing with her some of the handmade items she had received to share with other patients. She began speaking more openly about the importance of early detection and supporting families affected by cancer. One particularly meaningful project Catherine undertook was creating a traveling exhibition featuring some of the gifts she had received during her treatment. The display included the bravery blanket from the children's cancer ward, photographs of the Tibetan mandala, artwork from young supporters around the world, and excerpts from the most inspiring letters. The exhibition toured hospitals and community centers, sharing the message that love and support could be powerful medicine. The thank you process for these gifts was more complex than any Catherine had undertaken before. Many of the gifts had come from anonymous senders or from people who specifically requested no acknowledgement, wanting only to contribute to her healing. For those she could reach, Catherine wrote deeply personal responses, sharing how their specific gift had helped her through difficult moments. As Catherine approached the end of her treatment, she reflected on how the gifts had changed her understanding of her role as a princess yet again. The experience of receiving such profound love and support during her most vulnerable time had deepened her appreciation for the connections that bound the royal family to the people they served. These were not just subjects offering tribute to their princess, they were fellow human beings extending care to someone in need. The final gift that marked this period came as Catherine completed her chemotherapy treatment. It was a simple bouquet of flowers from her own garden at Anmerhall, picked by William and their children on the morning of her last session. Attached was a note from 9-year-old Prince George that read, "Mummy, you are the bravest person I know. These flowers are from our family to say we're proud of you." As Catherine held the flowers and looked around at the room filled with gifts from around the world, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The journey through cancer had been difficult, but it had also been illuminated by thousands of acts of love and kindness from people who had chosen to share her burden. The gifts had not only helped heal her body but had also healed her spirit, reminding her of the infinite capacity for human compassion and connection. Looking toward the future, Catherine knew that the lessons learned from these gifts would continue to shape her work as a princess for years to come. She had experienced firsthand the power of community support during times of crisis and understood more deeply than ever before how small acts of kindness could provide immense comfort to those who were struggling. The gifts had transformed her from someone who received love and gave service in return to someone who truly understood the reciprocal nature of human connection. Every future public appearance, every charitable endeavor, every interaction with someone facing their own challenges would be informed by the memory of how it felt to be held up by the collective strength and love of strangers who became, through their generosity, an extended family she would never forget. As she prepared to return to her public duties with renewed strength and purpose, Catherine carefully packed away many of the gifts she had received during her treatment, keeping them as treasured reminders of one of the most challenging and transformative periods of her life. Each item would continue to serve as inspiration for the work ahead and as evidence of the incredible power of human love to heal, strengthen, and transform even in the darkest of times.